Hi, my name is Jake Miller, co-founder and CEO of Unfiltered. Today I'm in Los Angeles in California and fortunate to have the opportunity to interview Sam Ovens, the founder and CEO of Consulting.com, a market-leading e-learning platform that helps everyday people start and grow their own business. Originally from New Zealand, Sam describes his first year in business as a miserable failure. After working 12 hours a day from his parents' garage, he was $30,000 in debt and hadn't made a single dollar in revenue. Consulting.com was his fourth business and where he really started to find success. In the 5 years after he started the business and before he turned 28, Sam moved to New York City and opened offices in Dublin and Manhattan, building out a thriving global community of self-educating entrepreneurs. Today, Consulting.com says it has a thriving community of over 20,000 active students, has helped create 52 millionaires, and has generated a collective $690 million in revenue for its students. Despite some controversy around Sam's story and training programs, Forbes estimates Sam's net worth at US $65 million. In this exclusive interview, Sam and I will be discussing his inspiring story, including his early years in business working out of his parents' garage and the most important lessons he learned from his first failed startups. For entrepreneurs just starting, we'll be delving deep into product market fit and the process Sam has developed to gain a deep, powerful understanding of a niche. And for entrepreneurs rapidly scaling, we'll be discussing how to build an effective, high-performing organization, including how to hire the best people and build a scalable company from day one. And as always, I'll be asking Sam his advice for you as business leaders. Sam Ovens, good to see you. Yeah,
How's it going?
Thanks so much for having us. You state that your mission is to collectively educate every human on Earth. What does that look like?
Well, I guess it would be like 7.8 billion humans educated in whatever thing it is that they want to be good at. So it could be educated in music, educated in rugby, educated in making a spacecraft, educated in like biology, surfing. We're not saying it has to be like maths and science, but just in whatever it is they want to do, that they're able to self-educate and themselves and achieve like a high level.
Okay, so you see Consulting.com going into broader education for all of these different fields as opposed to just being focused on helping people start and scale companies?
It depends. So like, I only know how to teach people how to start and grow a business and how to like focus on things and be more productive, and so that's what I can teach. But we can provide people with tools that they can use to teach themselves. Right? So there's like, if you think about some base level things, if you teach someone how to learn, then they can go and learn anything they want. So we're mostly focusing on some like core principles and frameworks and practices that anyone can use to basically master anything.
Right.
Because we can't possibly provide all the information in the world, you know?
Of course, yeah. So what would you say is your vision for Consulting.com?
Well, it is to basically help people start and grow a business and to have the best online training that's self-service, accessible to everyone, to start it, and then once they've started it, to grow it.
Yes.
And basically the best results-focused online business school.
Yeah, absolutely. You've always been very passionate about education. What do you think the biggest problem in education is today?
That it's had the life sucked out of it. You know, it's been like formalized, structured, there's so many rules, you've got teachers, you've got all this bureaucracy, you've got like classes and textbooks and homework and assignments and grades and tests and exams. And then you've got the subjects that they teach you at school. I mean, there's only a handful of them, but there is like an infinite array of things a human being can actually learn or be good at, and they think that if you're not good at math, then you're dumb.
Yeah.
Right? But that's not really true. Like, sure, you could be classed as dumb when it comes to math, but not everything else. But they use these heuristics to judge a human based on such a limited range of things. And it doesn't really align with someone's passion. So like when I was going through school, I was passionate about things that typically weren't school, like building a go-kart or a tree house or a race car or partying, things like this. And so my mind was always thinking about those things. And I remember I was always kind of getting told off in class for just like not focusing on the work, but the work was boring and the things I was interested in were not. And I always felt like, oh, I must just be stupid and I'm not very good at this thing.
Right.
And the teachers and the system I was in basically, told me that. But in hindsight, it was those passions and interests that actually led me to bigger discoveries than I could have made by just trying to learn, by memorizing facts and following instructions.
Yeah. So from those early experiences of your own, as well as everything you've learned through consulting.com, what do you think that the ultimate education system looks like?
Yeah, so it should be peer-to-peer instead of we have this false dichotomy of teacher and student. It's like the teacher is the teacher and they know everything and they're not a student. And then you've got the student who isn't a teacher and they should listen to the teacher, right? And this is a really strange kind of thing because really the best person to teach is the best student, right? Yeah. And really learning is a lifelong thing, and really someone might be an expert at teaching someone accounting or finance or sales, but they might be totally clueless when it comes to how to write code, right? So people can be a teacher and a student just depending on the situation and the other person that they're interacting with.
Right.
And our education systems don't deal with this at all. And they also don't personalize and adapt to their individual. So someone might be more visual, someone might like just reading text, someone might be extroverted and like talking to people and interacting with others. Some people might like just doing it alone.
Yeah.
And the systems we've got just force people down these linear paths, and if they don't comply with it, it's just get out.
Yeah.
Basically, the way I would describe it is the current systems, we treat it like a Henry Ford Model T production line. We grab the inputs, which are the human beings, like Henry Ford would grab raw materials, like iron, and then we just put them on a conveyor belt and just take them through. Year one, year two, we just hammer on them, and if they don't comply, they just get rejected out of the system. And what we produce out on the output end is basically just homogeneous carbon copy, obedient slaves.
Right. So yeah. So you would say sort of intense and intelligent personalization is where the greatest opportunities are for valuable education.
Treat it more you would grow a plant. So you set the environment.
Yeah.
And then the person you focus on setting the conditions in the environment, and then you let the person find their own path through there and self-discover and work through, instead of you trying to control every decision.
Yeah.
And that way people can do things that they're passionate about. They can kind of invent their own path through, and it's more enjoyable, it's fun, so it doesn't feel like work, or it doesn't feel like they're being forced to do it.
Yeah.
And let the real world and the real environment give feedback as to whether that person is learning or not.
Yes.
Instead of doing tests, which are abstractions of the real world.
Yeah.
Nothing beats reality than reality. You know what I mean? Yeah. So a test is an abstraction of reality. So I would much rather hire the person who, if I want to hire a person who can ride a bicycle, if I can see a person riding a bicycle, I'd much rather hire that person than the person with a PhD in riding bicycles.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And so we should use the real world as feedback.
Right.
And we should iterate and optimize based on it and our success in it, not like a test.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Just to challenge sort of some of that perspective a little bit, would you agree, though, that it's important that in the early years, young people should be exposed to all sorts of different pathways and options, and then from there they work out what they're passionate about? How
definitely.
Early on should we be almost putting someone on a pathway to greatness in one field?
Yeah, well, before someone can even interact with anything. They need to learn like the human protocol system, which is basically like a language, the number system and the laws. And like you need to understand some fundamental like principles and building blocks that you can use to then go and do and self-discover and do what you want. So yeah, I think that in the initial stages, there definitely needs to be some structure and some formal kind of rules.
Yeah.
But then at a certain stage, once that person is capable of like self-awareness and autonomy, they should be able to like start going off on their own.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I've known you for a number of years now, and the first time I interviewed you must be five years ago now. Scary how fast time flies. I'd say over that time, you've been driven and motivated by a lot of different things. Going back 5 years ago, sitting in Auckland, you were building Snap Inspect at the time, as well as the early days of consulting.com. You were very much into fast cars and nice watches and nice things, and then you moved to New York and you got this beautiful apartment in New York, and now we're here in Venice in California. And obviously over that time your kind of motivations and aspirations, I would say, and from my observation anyway, have changed. What drives you today? What would you say today is getting you out of bed, and what are you most passionate about?
Yeah, well, the first thing that really drove me to start a business was like freedom and money, because I didn't have either.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I was working a 9-to-5 job that I really hated. It was just like politics and bureaucracy and nothing real. And then I didn't have much money either. I had nothing basically. So I was like, those were the two things that I wanted, and entrepreneurship I saw as a vehicle to help me get that. Yeah. And so my first objectives and goals were freedom and money. And so I remember just thinking, like, if I can just make 100 grand a year, then I'm all right. And so I was aiming for that. And then when I got that, I was like, I think I fulfilled like some kind of childhood thing of having a Ferrari, right? And I did that, and then I thought, oh, I'm just done now. I may as well retire. And then I realized, like, this is actually pretty boring. And I actually miss building things. It's kind of lame just driving around thinking you're cool and having some money. Like, I want to build something and do something. And so then I set my sights on like growing the money and building a company that could like produce more money, because I was still very materialistic, like, because that's all I could really see back then. Because you watch movies of like business people, and pop culture and like public opinion always kind of shapes these business figures to be like this. You know what I mean? And so I thought that's just what you did.
Right.
And I thought that was the goal. And so I kept trying to do that, but I just kept feeling unfulfilled each time. I was like, well, now I've got 3 cars. And this is a pain in the ass, because now I've like, one of them's always got something wrong with it. Yeah. And like, they always need cleaning. And I was like, now I'm thinking about the administration of these things. It's just a total, like, this sucks. Right. And my life isn't really any better. I just have some objects. And what I realized then was, business was a good teacher of life. Like it showed me what I actually enjoyed doing, which wasn't so much just trying to make money and buy things. That was actually quite unfulfilling and stressful. What I really enjoyed doing was solving problems and building things. Like, that was what I really enjoyed. And then I realized that the other things were distractions from solving problems and building things. Yes. They were actually slowing down the building and distracting me from the building. And so I realized that I just got rid of all of that stuff, and I just focused solely on just trying to solve problems, build things, and learning, education, like things I discovered in myself that were like the true things I really liked.
Right.
And then those became the main thing.
Where you're feeling like you're having an impact on other people's lives.
Yeah, so it's like you want to achieve... the perfect balance is like symbiosis. You don't want to be a parasite, right? Like a parasite will feed off of something else. It latches onto something and it feeds. And there's a lot of businesses that are like that, and they're toxic businesses, right? Yeah. But the best business is one that's symbiotic. So the whole is better off for it being there. So like it contributes something and the other thing contributes something to it, and it goes around like this.
Yeah.
So I looked inside myself and I was like, well, I like solving problems, building things, education, technology. How can I combine all of these elements in a way where I am helping other people and there is a symbiosis there?
Yeah.
And that's where I found it to be good, because you're working hard, you're helping other people, you're making the world better, and you're also making an income for yourself. And
yeah, and it's easy to take money and freedom somewhat for granted when you have it. But for you, where did you find that line to be between, when you were on that journey to obtaining money and freedom, to that line, when you reached that line where you felt like, having more money or sort of more freedom as such wasn't materially going to make you happier? Where was that line for you? Because I think people perceive that line to be so much more greater forwards than it is, particularly as it relates to money. What were your sort of experiences around identifying that point?
Sure. Well, really, I think a lot of people, when they don't really know themselves well, they optimize their decisions to satisfy other people, right?
Yeah.
So they're trying to build an image that impresses other people, and like that's what they're optimizing for, not really themselves, because the perception and the reality aren't the same. And I was definitely doing that because like I thought that's what you did, but really the reality of it was this isn't really that fun. And it's when you understand that and the difference, and then you realize it's more important to just, who cares what other people think, and you just want to satisfy yourself.
Yeah.
So I would say that's the point where you realize that. It's like self-awareness.
Yeah.
And also freedom, it's not, like I had this false belief that freedom just meant you didn't do any work and you just lied on a beach or something. But really freedom, I think a lot of people want it because they have to work, because they need that money to live, right? And so I still feel free. Like I work harder than I've ever worked now, but it's my choice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't have to do it. I could not do it if I wanted to. And I think that is the main thing, that it's a choice, but you still are working extremely hard.
Yeah.
People have a lot of false beliefs about these things.
Okay, all right. And outside of your work and obviously your family, your wife, your cats who are walking in and out of the shop, where do you kind of derive most of your happiness? What are your other biggest things that you do today to, for pleasure?
Reading books, and then like just hanging out with my wife, like doing nothing really that complicated or fancy.
Yes.
Like I like simple things, and like hanging out at the beach or in nature, going out for breakfast, reading a book, and learning things and hanging out with people that are interesting.
Absolutely. And you've always been someone who's had, like a schedule, and you've stuck to it, and sort of routines and the way you do things. What does that look like today? Like it's sort of Monday to Friday, Saturday, Sunday. What does a day in the life of Sam Ovens look like?
Sure, it changes a lot. I mean, the things that don't change are, like I wake up at 6:50 in the morning, go to the gym, which is in my garage. So it's everything's optimized, so there's minimal waste, right? I hate commuting, driving, waiting, lines, all forms of waste I've tried to eliminate. So I wake up at 6:50, gym at 7, then at 8 a.m. I have a shower and a breakfast, and then 8:30 I meditate for like 20 minutes, then at 9 o'clock I start my work day, and then I'll probably stop work at 10. So I work roughly 13 hours a day, and 6 days a week. Sundays is wife day, and I stop work at 10, and then I'm asleep by 11. And that is consistent, never changes ever.
Right.
But within that day, that changes based on what's needed. So for the past 6 months, I've spent 90% of my time hiring, like just interviewing probably 480 people to find engineers, and trying to like navigate the whole ecosystem of talent in this particular field and how to get the best talent,
Yep.
which has been quite a hard problem to solve. But then at other times it might be creating content, or it might be building a system to get customers, or just doing a lot of admin stuff in the company to make sure that different problems are fixed and little flare-ups that have happened are cleaned up. The pattern and the structure is constant, but the variable within that structure is always changing.
Absolutely, yeah. And, out with students quite often as well, right? You do these mastermind workshops and so on.
So that happens every 4 months.
Okay.
There's 3 a year for 3 days each, so 9 days.
Right.
Which you might define as a lot.
And, your story has been, relatively well documented over the years, but for those that are sort of not familiar watching this, I do want to go back to the very early days and talk about, your early years growing up in Auckland and sort of what your motivations and aspirations were at that time.
Sure.
Yeah.
So at what stage?
I think, first of all, just like when you were young, before you went to college, when you were at high school. Yeah, I from memory, your dad was a builder, mum was a teacher. Sort of, how did those early years kind of define, what you wanted to achieve in life?
Yeah, well, my earliest memories are just taking things apart. So, like, if I got a hold of it, I'd probably dismantle it. Like, even my parents' stereo VCR players.
Yep.
Like, if you remember those things, I'd always, if I saw something, I'd be like, what is inside it? And I'd dismantle it, and I would just play with all the parts and figure out how they work.
Yeah.
And I always had a curiosity of how things worked, much more a curiosity of how machines worked than like talking to humans. So I would often like lock myself away in a room and just play with computers or dismantle computers, often breaking them.
Yep.
In the earlier days, I did more harm than good, for sure. I broke pretty much every electrical device we had. And then it was building like tree huts, go-karts. So I always liked having projects where I was building something and like understanding how things worked.
Right.
And I was introverted.
Okay.
So, and awkward with humans. So like that's basically my initial conditions. Yeah.
Most people can go back to that point in their life and say, my hero was, a Sir Richard Branson or a Dan Carter or someone. Did you have any sort of early heroes and, people who you really looked up to at that point?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever thought about that before. Well, the one that I do remember the most would be Bill Gates.
Okay.
Because my first computer was like my first love.
Yeah.
And Microsoft and Bill Gates back at that time was the king of like invention and technology. That's the first person I remember. But then I got kind of derailed from these things when partying and girls were introduced to my life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's a period of blur in there. And then I rediscovered these interests after that blur.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And you went to university, you studied your degree, and then what was the degree you graduated with? Sorry?
I didn't even graduate.
Sorry, you dropped out, that's right.
Yeah.
But you were nearly finished from memory.
Yeah. I was doing a Bachelor of Commerce.
That's right, yeah. And then you got the role at Vodafone, and you're at Vodafone, and as the story goes, your girlfriend's friend invited you to the beach house, right, which turned out to be a private island. So tell me more about that experience, because obviously it was very formative for you, and how that changed your perspective on the world.
Yeah. Well, there's always this pattern in my life of like forming a mental image of what something is, like a perception of what it is, and really desiring that thing, and then achieving it, and then finding out that it's not actually anything like that image, and being quite disappointed.
Yeah.
So perception and reality have always like been themes where I've been disappointed. And so I went to study a BCom because everyone else was doing a BCom, right? And then because apparently that's what you did if you were going to be successful. Like, I was just basing all of my decisions off other people's, like, gossip. And then I went and got a job at a corporate, because that's what you were supposed to do. And then I went and worked at an office, but it was just, I was like, what are we even doing here? I was like, does anyone do anything in this building? I went to try and find the people that built things, and they didn't exist. We used contractors to do basically everything. Like, the people inside were mostly proxies for external things. So I was like, this is so messed up. It's like politics, proxies, like PowerPoint presentations, meetings.
Yep.
And I was like, I can't enjoy a lie, basically. It'd be all right for a day, but not for my life. And so then I took this trip to this island, and it was like the first time my eyes had been opened to something. So like back in old times when there was a town, they would drive a pail like out in the, like a few hundred meters out or maybe a kilometer out from the town. They'd put a pail in the ground,
Right.
and you weren't supposed to venture beyond the pale of the state because it was dangerous out there. But mostly it was a control mechanism, because if people went out there and learned other things, then they could be a danger to the power structures of that place,
Yep.
right? Because they had been radicalized in a way. Yep. And so going to that island was me going well beyond the pale of the state. So I was an obedient, like, slave, I guess, from like being put through the system.
Yeah.
And then I went and got radicalized out on that island, where I basically saw that, like, there was a helicopter there, and I remember like Googling how much would this thing cost. And then I calculated how many years it would take me to buy this thing with my current salary. And it was like 4 lifetimes.
Yeah.
And I was like, something's wrong here. And it like blew up my brain. Like I couldn't compute it. I was like trying to figure out how someone would even be able to own this. And I remember asking everyone on the island, like, what does this guy do? And they just said he's an entrepreneur. And I didn't even know what an entrepreneur was. So I remember Googling that. Seriously, one of the first things I Googled was, what is an entrepreneur?
Right.
And
Wow.
that's where it started. And I couldn't unsee that. You know, like once you've seen something and been exposed to it, you can't go back.
So true. Yeah, it's like when you see a different world, and it's like, this is how life is meant to be. Yeah.
But probably the biggest drive, like, it wasn't just about the material things. Like, the dude actually seemed like he was having fun too. Like, it wasn't like he was just doing politics. He was actually very counter, like, the corporate way. Like, he would wear linen pants and talk normally. Like, there was no formalism, and I was like, I was just shocked. I was like, all of the stuff that's going on back in this building is fake.
Yeah.
And everyone here believes a lie.
Yeah. Yeah, and the guy we're talking about actually retired early to spend, most of his life with his kids, right? So he definitely has worked out his priorities, yeah. And what would you say, you went back from the island back to Auckland, presumably back to Vodafone at that point. At what time did you go, I'm done, I'm going to go and start a business and become an entrepreneur?
Well, I was still at university because I had 2 papers to finish. And so when I got back from this island, I was doing an internship at Vodafone and I was at Auckland Uni. And I did this elective paper because everyone said it was easy. And it was on like birds. And I didn't go to any classes because people told me you don't need to go to any classes. And so I was sitting in the library the night before the exam studying a textbook about birds and seagulls and things. And I just was like, what the hell am I doing here? I was like, this is wrong. And I remember just like, I thought about it for a bit and I was like, no, stay. Then I remember like going back and forth like 6 times in my mind. And then I was like, screw it. I just put the textbook in the bin and I just was like, I quit. Both, like job and this, I'm just going to start a business. Because in my mind, I was like, surely I should be trying to solve a problem and like add value to the world, not learning about some seagulls. Yeah. It was a good contrast of like, surely this is the right thing to do, even though other people say it's not.
Right.
So I kind of learned to go against the crowd
Yeah.
in that moment.
Did you have an idea at this point?
I had like lots of different ideas, and it just seemed like even just thinking about those ideas was more productive than learning about seagulls.
Right.
Yeah.
So at that point, you moved into your parents' garage. How did your mum, being a teacher, how did she kind of deal with you making this decision?
Well, she was a little bit shocked, but mostly because I had such high conviction. When I finally did make the decision, it's just like, when you've got a lot of conviction in something, people can often, they're not as skeptical, you know what I mean? So people were definitely like, I don't know if you should do that, but I was quite confident in my decision that, like, I think if you're only like a little bit confident on it, they can sway you a lot, but yeah.
Right, and those first couple of startups you worked on weren't as successful as you hoped. I believe you racked up about $30,000 in debt by the end of that. So when you reflect on that time now, what was your mindset like, and how did you continue pushing forward through a time that was presumably quite difficult?
Yeah, well, it's just like learning. So it's kind of like if you're going to get on if you're going to ride a bike for the first time without training wheels.
Yeah.
You're going to graze your knee.
Yeah.
Right? So like that, it was me getting my knee grazed and learning how to balance. So the first business I started was an online job board called Promote Yourself. And I found a software engineer and locked myself in a room and spent a whole year building this thing. And all the money I had at the time, which was like probably like $6,000 or something, and I never spoke to I never spoke to anyone about it. I kept it like real secret.
Right.
And I never validated any of my assumptions. I just built this thing based on what I thought people would want. Yeah. And then came the day when it was built, and I went out to go and talk to people about it, and they all just looked at it and they were like, "This is cool, but I don't need it."
Yeah.
And I was like, I kept speaking to people and they kept saying that. And I was like, oh my God, I've built something no one wants. And so it sucked because I'd wasted that money in a whole year, but like the way I saw it is I could just quit and give up, which made no sense. Like go back to the job, or try again, and I know exactly what went wrong. So the best part about it was that I knew the cause. And when you know what the cause is, you're like, well, next time I'm not going to make that mistake.
Yeah.
What
did you do differently next time? What was the...
So I realized that you really need to solve a problem for people. You just don't build you don't come up with an idea in the shower and then it just, I think people, when they're trying to start a business, they believe it's all about this unique idea, right? Like, I just need an idea. So you don't need an idea. You want to solve a problem. And so I had that insight. And then I was still actually working at Vodafone at this time. So I had my first failure while I was still at the job. And I had a problem that I knew quite well, which was getting food for lunch. Down in the Viaduct area, there's no good lunch spots. And this was a real problem. Everyone talked about it like it was true. And I was like, well, I could create an office lunch delivery business. And I did, and it worked. And it made money. But then I learned my second lesson, and I actually quit my job in halfway through that business, right?
Right.
And the second lesson I learned is that food doesn't scale, and that I really dislike dealing with food. And so the problem we had there was that we solved a problem and it spread rapidly. It really grew without any marketing or anything because it was such a problem. And I was like, aha, I'd identified the true cause of that first scenario. I've solved it on this next one, but I learned a new thing, that you need to think about scalability.
Yeah.
And so I was like, all right, time for round 3 then. I need to build something scalable. What scales? Well, food is like atoms and it cools down and things. Bits can scale well, like software. So I was like, all right, I need to solve a problem and use software.
Yes.
And so I then looked for a problem and I found one in property management, and they were doing inspections by clipboard and pen and paper. and digital cameras, then compiling it all into Word, and it was just a lot of manual labor. And I was like, well, I could build an app for that. And I was like, okay, does it solve a problem? Yes.
Yep.
And then, is it scalable? Yes. And so I got both of those right, and then that one did even better, and it took off. And that one still exists today. It's called Snap Inspect. And I started it with the same founder, the same like co-founder I had from the other companies. So his name was Terry. He built Promote Yourself with me, and that failed. Then he stuck around with me to do the office lunch delivery business. Then he went with me to do Snap Inspect. And then my lesson from that one was that I don't like property management.
Yep.
And so I realized you need to not only solve a problem, it needs to be scalable, but it needs to be something you're passionate about.
Yeah.
And I just didn't enjoy talking to property managers.
Right. Yeah, and you talk about identifying that problem that people have and then solving it. I believe with Snap Inspect you sold about $5,000 worth of licenses before you launched. What did that experience teach you, and the advice you give other entrepreneurs about selling an idea before you actually have a product?
Sure. So it's just the main resource we have is time, right? And so anything you can do to save time is really important. And I burned a whole year of my time to find out that no one wanted what I built.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, how can I go to that validation stage immediately? So I was just like, well, let's mock up like a prototype of this thing, go to the market, sell it to them as a concept and say it'll be ready like later. Do you want to buy this? And you can actually sell it as a concept, and if it takes off there, then you've got not only money, not only conviction, but a whole bunch of motivation to build it. Instead of doing that at the end, which is so dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What do you think a scalable commercial product market fit looks like? Like, how can entrepreneurs be sure that they've found something that has all of those aspects?
So product market fit, that can only be achieved once the product is built and you're iterating towards like perfection. And that can't be done conceptually. The validation is just validating that your assumptions about this thing are true. It's like, is this a problem? Will people actually pay money for it? Is this differentiated enough from other products available in the market? You're trying to validate those key assumptions, which you can do theoretically. But then product market fit is a different beast. It's like, you must release the thing, and it's a two-way interrelationship between the users and the thing. And that can only, you have to let them use it, watch them, listen to their feedback, iterate, test things, and it's evolving the thing through a series of iterations between the user and the product. That's the only way to achieve product market fit. What does it look like? It's when really what it looks like is adoption. So like when something is being mass adopted, that's a really good signal. If no one's adopting, then you probably don't have it.
Right. So if you were going to walk through the process from idea to getting a product market fit through those steps you've mentioned, if you were going to summarize that, how would you summarize it?
So find an overlooked problem and solve it with a simple solution. Validate all your assumptions before incurring any time or financial cost. Then build a scrappy version 1, ship it early, and then iterate rapidly towards perfection.
Such good advice. What do you think are the biggest false indicators of product market fit?
Fame, like any form of thing that isn't a user adopting it and using it. So like people's opinions about something, like you've got to be really careful of false positives, and there's a lot of them in business. Like, for example, you don't want to be focusing on like how famous the company is or how famous you are. You want to be focusing on, do we have the best product, and are users in love with it, and are they adopting it at a faster rate than any other technology? And you've got to shut out all of that noise. the hype, that
Yeah.
that destroys things, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I fell for it a lot in my earlier days, because I was basically iterating and adjusting based on like an image, based on other people's perceptions of an image. So messed up.
Yeah, that's so true. And you've said that your second biggest epiphany was when you realised that the key to success for virtually every business is to identify a niche and figure out their pains and desires. So talk to me more about kind of this idea of, you've mentioned obviously finding a painful problem, but what have you learned about niches and actually finding valuable niches?
Sure. Well, a niche is basically just something to focus on, right? Because it's very hard to focus on the entire world, because you've got a diverse population with so many different interests and problems. It's like, sure, you could focus on the world if you solved death, or you solved cancer, right?
Yeah.
Or you solved some massive things, but chances are you're not going to do that on your version 1. So you've got to pick like a smaller cluster to focus on. And even if we look at like organisms in nature, like they have niches too. So you've got to adapt to an environment, and you want to be competitive, and you want to be fully adjusted and adapted to your environment. That's basically what product market fit is.
Yep.
And you want your company to thrive in this environment, and the environment's the niche. And when you focus on a niche, it's so easy to understand who the people are, what their problem is, what their desires are, what solutions there are, and what all of the downfalls of all of those solutions are. So you can really simplify everything. And then when you create it, it's kind of like an echo chamber. People within these clusters talk to each other, they copy each other, and it's easy to get adoption, it's easy to target and market these people, it's easy to understand them.
Yep.
Instead of thinking about the whole world, it's complex.
Yeah. What is your niche for consulting.com, and how did you identify that?
Yeah, so you start small and then you expand over time. So the first version of was back when it wasn't even called consulting.com. It was back when I had Snap Inspect, right?
Yeah.
I had a problem, which was I needed to generate money to fund the development of this software. And so to do that, I would sell consulting services like on digital marketing to local businesses. And then I'd get that money and fund my SaaS company. Then I realized that a lot of SaaS companies needed money. And so the first course I made was called Cash Flow Consulting. And it literally was for SaaS business owners who need money to fund development of their SaaS, and they are willing to do it through the sale of services to local businesses.
Yeah.
That's how niche it was, man.
Right.
And it still to this day, nothing has just taken or caught fire with the market so fast, because I had such focus on that.
Yeah.
Like that thing just exploded.
I remember the booklets in the office. Yeah.
Yeah, it was I couldn't even handle what happened with that. It was just evidence of what happens when you truly solve a problem that people have. It just catches fire.
Yeah. And today, what are the biggest mistakes you identify your students making when they're trying to identify those niches?
Well, what you want to do with a niche is there's 3 elements. There's something you're interested in. That's key.
Yeah.
Then there's something like an industry or a group of people, and then their problem. And all 3 of these things should combine in a way where it's like, I'm interested in this, I know who these people are, and I can speak their language, and I understand their problem, and I think I can solve it, right? You need all of these elements to be true for this to take place. And I think the biggest problems people have when picking a niche is they don't know themselves. They actually don't know what they're interested in.
Right.
So they can't choose something. And instead what they fall back on is copying other people. So they'll look and they'll ask questions like, what is the best niche? Or does anyone have a list of the top 10 niches? It's like, you can't create that.
Yeah.
And even if someone did produce that, then everyone would rush to those things, and they would be the 10 worst niches. Yeah. Right? So the best niche is personal to each individual.
It's ones that you uniquely know, right?
It's something you're in love with.
Yeah.
Passion and and interest is upstream of skill.
Yeah.
So if you have passion and interest, you'll develop skill. But if you don't have passion and interest and you've got the skill, you won't even be able to apply it.
Yeah.
So that is honestly the main thing. And it's because a lot of people just don't know who they are, what they're interested in, and they've become so conditioned to society and just copying other people. They're like little self-replicators. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I was speaking at a women's prison in Auckland recently, and it's not to say that prisoners are passionate about prison, but it was on a business entrepreneurship course, and I said to them, I was talking about the exact concept of finding a niche and owning it and building a business, and I was like, you guys are probably more better equipped than anyone in the world to come out of prison and build something for the prison system, because you know what works and what doesn't inside the system, right? It's you've got to find something that you uniquely know and can add value to. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, and you'd have to also be somewhat passionate about solving that problem. Because I'm sure some people get out of prison, they're I never want to think about that thing ever again.
Exactly.
But there are people who I remember seeing a startup a guy invented who was in prison, who then got out, and he invented this system where you can communicate with inmates. So you can send a text or an email or even a phone call, and then what this system does is because those are the common inputs that people like to use, but the only way to get a message into a prison is through a letter. But people don't write letters these days.
Exactly.
And so what they do is they allow you to send a letter through any medium, text, email, or phone call, and then they turn it into a letter and send it to that inmate.
Right, got you.
Yeah, so it's a way...
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
Because inside, he was closed off from communication.
Yeah.
And he's found a way to optimize a message to get around the rules of prison.
That's a great idea. Yeah, absolutely.
So you're on the right path with that.
Yeah, so let's move on to the next section now before the rapid fires. And I want to talk a little bit more about companies that are rapidly scaling. They have, a product market fit, a customer base, and they're ready to sort of pour fuel on the fire as such. And I want to focus on 3 areas, kind of building an effective high-performance organization, then some advice around hiring, scaling, and sort of workplaces of the future. So starting with organizations, at a macro level, you talk about this kind of full stack methodology for building a business. Can you briefly unpack this for us?
Sure. So it's basically, you want generalists that are specialists in a specific thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's this false dichotomy thing, people say, oh, you should be a generalist, or oh, you should be a specialist, and the specialists only know one thing and they can't interface with anyone else and they're useless.
Yeah.
And the generalists aren't really strong at any one thing, so they're jack of all trades. The answer isn't on either side of this thing. It's to be both, right? So you want to have a broad range of skills. You want to understand the entire system. A company is a system, and the best people in business and the best hires, they're the ones that understand all the components of the system and how they interact with each other to achieve an ultimate goal. Yeah. And so if they see a movement in one thing, they know where that's going to kick somewhere else in the machine. Yeah. And they know how to orchestrate in this whole. Whereas other people who are just fixed on their thing, they only understand that and not how that interconnects to other pieces. I'll give you an example. We spend a lot of money on paid advertising. Yeah. And more than $1 million a month, most months, on ads. Now, an accountant, our accountant, is horrified to see that we spend $1 million a month on advertising. He's like, you need to cut this back. And I'm like, dude, we spent $1 million and we made $2 million. Why would we cut that back? He still failed to understand it. I've told him about 14 times, but because he does not understand the whole, right? And so sometimes expenses can be investments, and sometimes profits are bad, right? Some people think profits are the holy grail of business. Well, Amazon, the most valuable company on earth, at least for a while, more than $1 trillion, it has only made a profit 1 year out of 25 in business, right? So Bezos' strategy was actually to not make a profit and drop the margins so low that no one could survive. He basically went underwater with bigger tanks than everyone else and didn't surface for air until everyone was dead.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So you can use profits it can be a good or a bad, and costs can be investments. Like, this is the type of thinking that I look for in a person. They're not these binary state things where they're like, this is good, this is bad, costs are bad, profits are good, company that doesn't make profit, bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this stupid thinking. I like someone who's unconventional and can understand the whole and play with it in unusual ways which no one understands, but that ends up coming out on top.
Right.
That's basically what full stack is.
Yeah. Okay. And what do your kind of hiring techniques look like to find those people?
A lot of hard work and time. Talking to a lot of people is probably the best way. I used to hire people, I'd just interview someone and I was like, all right, hired.
Yeah.
I've made some hires in the beginning by only talking to one person. And that always ended up to be a really bad idea. So then I learned later on that you really need to talk to a lot, 100 or at least 30, before you really understand what good looks like, right? Because if you've only seen one, the way the human mind works is, how do you understand hot without cold, dark without light? So until you're able to see the ends of the spectrum, you can't actually make any form of accurate judgment. And so if you're hiring on your first shot, you have no idea what you're doing. So I'd say the number one strategy is that, and then we use recruiters. We don't post on job boards at all. So when we hire, we don't go to any job boards, we don't put it anywhere on the internet. We just have a curated collection of about 10 recruiting companies we use. We go to them and we let them go out and scout it, and then we funnel them into our system, and then we go through a process of about 7 interviews. And we have to interview about 152 people to find one.
Wow.
And that's from recruiters.
Yeah. And how would you describe the importance of culture fit when you're hiring? Because some people say it's the most important thing. For you, how high up on the list is finding someone that aligns with the culture that you're trying to create?
Yeah, I don't really consider it culture fit. The main thing I'm looking for is, I would just define it using 3 elements. It would be intelligent, unorthodox athletes, right? So I'm looking for people, number one is just raw mental horsepower. Nothing beats just someone who's just extremely intelligent and able to solve problems and deal with complexity. That's number one. Number 2 would be unorthodox. So that's the thing where they're willing to go against the crowd. So they're gonna form their own analysis on something, and then they're going to stand with their conviction. Even if everyone else in the world criticizes them, ridicules them, they're not going to care. They're going to stay holding that position. And quite often they're right. Because opportunity is something that no one else sees, right? So you don't want someone who's going to optimize for popularity. You want someone who's going to optimize for what's right. And then the third element is athlete. And by that I mean just someone who has a disgusting work ethic. So they understand that being smart isn't enough, being different isn't enough. You also have to combine that with just ruthless, long hours working hard and intensely for long periods of time.
That can be hard to test though, right? Because everybody in job interviews just goes on about how hard they work. Do you do brutal reference checks every time you're hiring of as many people as possible?
We've honestly found that in order to actually achieve the first 2 elements, it can't be done without doing the hard work.
Right.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's quite funny how that happens. The people who do get to that level of understanding and awareness and skill, it's only achieved through accruing thousands of hours of intense work and caring about it we've noticed that we analyze the keywords from resumes and interviews and stuff, and we do a lexical analysis to see if we can spot patterns in the process to find clues. And we have found one with a high correlation, which is the word love. People who are really good use the word love. Like, and usually the word love is reserved for talking about a human. Like, oh, I love my kids, I love my wife. Really talented people use the word love to talk about their thing.
Right.
Their passion, their job, their whatever.
Interesting.
It's funny, if you read like some of the best software engineering books of all time, like The Art of Computer Programming, for example, people usually, like, at the start of the book, they what's the word? They devote it to like their wife or their children.
Right.
This one's devoted to his computer. I'm not joking, but I was like, this is obviously going to be a good book.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. And is there any, you have always been a voracious reader. Is there any book in particular on like hiring or building great teams that you think is the best you've ever read?
Yes, it would probably be How Google Works. It's written by Eric Schmidt.
Yeah.
So he knows, you'd hope.
Yeah. Absolutely. So let's talk now briefly about scaling headcount, because you've written before that how 1 year, your company scaled significantly. You scaled to about 40 people, but you said your productivity and throughput like actually declined. So what are the lessons you learned about keeping things agile and the productivity retaining when you hire more people?
Yeah, that's a good like lesson, and it's, we quite often think, if we want to move faster, let's just put some more humans in the workforce, you know what I mean? But what happens there is that if you put a new person on a team, then they have to be taught what to do, and you're now taking your best worker offline to educate someone who's not going to be anywhere near as good even when they come back online. So what you see by adding more people is you actually slow down. And it's quite fascinating to watch. It's, for example, like, and scientifically, this is like entropy existing. So, for example, there's an optimal number of like components in a system for it to achieve the maximum output. And, for example, if you want to bake a cake, 2 people might be faster than 1, but 30 people probably slower than 1.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you have to find this point of efficiency. And what it really taught me is that instead, you want to aim to have as small a team as possible, but scale in terms of the skill level of each individual. So you can find an individual that's 10 times better than another one in terms of this job, and it's way better to have one person that's the power of 10 than 10 people that are the power of 1.
Yeah, in Silicon Valley they talk about 10x developers, right? Like finding those people that can have the output of 10 times people. Yeah. Okay.
And I'd say it's honestly more than that. Like, that's not even an exaggeration. Like, when it comes to knowledge workers and people who have to use like their brains, like it could be 100x.
Right. Okay. So how would you say, like, what have you learned about scaling sustainably and efficiently outside of that lesson?
Honestly, there's only one way. So like, most people, the only way that you can get average people to perform is with like, by policing them and running a command and control type thing, right? Yeah. But that doesn't scale because one person can't make all the decisions. So that one's doomed. So the only way to really scale is to build a decentralized, autonomous company where you actually give people the ability to make important decisions, right? That's the only way it can scale. However, the only way that structure works is if you have highly intelligent people. So really, if you boil this and reduce it down to one thing, it's the number one priority of any entrepreneur is just to find the best people.
So true. Yeah, and it's something that we see time and time again, like interviewing top CEOs, is that's what they spend most of their time doing, right? Is hiring.
I wish, actually, that guy, we went to see that guy in New Zealand. Do you remember? What was the Razine guy?
Razine?
Or he had that paint company.
Yeah.
That he sold. He was on the shore or something.
Yes. David Levine. Yeah.
Yes, that guy. And he actually I remember asking him when you and I went to see him, I was like, what is the most important thing in business? He was like, it's all about the people. And I remember leaving that interview and I was like, the hell was that guy talking about?
Yeah.
And it took me like 10 years to learn that lesson.
Absolutely, yeah. You've called communication a cost and destructive inefficiency. Why?
Because, like, communication is when people aren't doing something. Like they're trying to understand what to do or what other people are doing, and so no actual doing is taking place. And so meetings are a massive inefficiency, and you can never get everyone on the same page. That's impossible. So most companies, they complain about communication, and like there's not enough communication, but really the problem lies in the structure of the thing. So you want to build like small teams no bigger than 4 or 5 people, and assign them a problem to solve or a goal to achieve, and let them free at it. Give them full autonomy, and then that team, like each unit, should be separate, and so they don't need to talk to each other. They can if they want to, but they don't need to. And there's no handoff. So like someone isn't doing the research and then handing it to someone to build it and then handing it to someone to publish. That is the worst idea in the world, because there's going to be so much lag. One team should handle something from end to end, and communication happens like without even thinking that you are communicating with a team of about 4 or 5.
Right.
It's organic and natural. It's when you go above that that all the problems occur. So it's not that I'm saying like people should never speak. Like it's just that you don't want to have to stop. It should just be naturally occurring. And you have to do that through a autonomous distributed structure of teams.
No, it's great advice. And from the interesting thing about talking to you is you've got obviously your own experiences, but also those of the 20,000 customers you've worked with over the years. So from your experience teaching these entrepreneurs to build their businesses, what are the most common problems you see people facing when it comes to scaling their organizations from say like 10 to 30 or to 10 to 50 people?
That's a good question. So it's absolutely the people. Like at that stage, like when it's you generally don't get 10 employees without validating some idea and making some kind of money. So at that stage, it's always people. Like once you've got got a company with a customer and a product that makes some money, the leading cause of death is talent.
Is there any form of structure that you think, let's say you're a 50-person organization that organization would need that a 5-person organization wouldn't need? Like what would you say are the biggest things you need to be building out from a structure perspective as you get bigger?
That's a good question, and it's having like principles. So clearly defined principles of how to make decisions. Like you see this as a recurring pattern across the best companies in the world. Amazon, they talk about the principles in every meeting. Bezos talks about the principles in every letter to shareholders. Same with Google. Like the best companies in the world, they have clear principles that haven't changed from day one, and a clear mission statement and a clear goal. So like if people don't know what they're trying to do, they're not going to go anywhere. They're going to just loop, right? And so that North Star needs to be like clearly defined. And then you need principles that people can use to make decisions. These like heuristics. So if we're in a scenario and we have to choose between this or that, what do? You look at the principles, we do that. Most companies never like create this. This is basically the DNA code like for the organism as it scales. So because you can never like make all the decisions yourself beyond like 5 people. So you've got to have people make decisions and aim towards the same thing in a consistent manner. And that's the principles. They have to be clear, and people actually have to use them. Like, I remember Enron, its principles were like honesty and integrity and stuff, but obviously they didn't have any of that. So it's not enough to just write them on a piece of paper. You actually need to live and breathe them.
Banks and so on are the worst at that, right?
They always put the honesty and integrity. Be careful when someone says they have integrity. It's a warning sign.
Exactly. So just before we head into the rapid fire questions, I want to briefly touch on workplaces because I know you've got some strong thoughts around this. You've said that you think open plan offices are a bad idea and a stupid modern day corporate fad. Like, what do you think the most productive space looks like today?
Sure. I've thought about this a lot. It would be basically, so you break your team, you've got teams of like 4 or 5, right? So there should be like an office for like 4 or 5 desks in it. So they're sitting in an open plan, so communication is fluid, but they're closed off in their own kind of section, like a cell.
Yeah.
And they've got their own couch area and their own meeting room and whiteboard area. So they're basically within the company's office, they've got their own cell. So they just are naturally going, like they're naturally talking and communicating, but they're not getting interrupted by communication flows that they don't need to hear.
Yeah, completely different.
Yeah,
that's really smart. Yeah, and are you a big fan? Like, David Hennemeyer Hansen talks about kind of remote working and so on. What do you think of that and having remote, like distributed workforce, like all over the country?
I don't believe in it.
Okay.
Like, well, it depends, right? So
Yeah.
when you're starting out, it's great because you don't have money for an office, you don't want to lease,
Yeah.
and you don't want to buy furniture, and you don't want to have to employ people and pay payroll taxes, right? Which is, there's a lot of like annoying things that come with an office.
Yeah.
So when you start, absolutely go remote.
Yeah.
Best idea in the world. But at a certain point, the communication is going to break, and it's hard for a culture to form virtually.
Yeah.
And the key thing with this is that nothing beats putting like a bunch of smart people in a room together. Like, you don't even need to have a plan when you do that, because one will emerge, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the best ideas and inventions and innovations, they're accidents, right? So it's like an office is a human collider, like as if the humans are particles, right?
Yeah.
Like you're colliding smart people and accidents occur, and those accidents are quite often the best inventions a company ever has. For example, Google AdWords was an accident, right? Most of Google's billion-dollar businesses were accidents.
Yeah.
And they're very adamant on having people in person, because something happens when you put people together where they lose their sense of self and they adopt like a hive mind. So they become one consciousness and they think and act as a whole. Whereas when you've got people separate, they're just thinking about themselves. And it's very hard. Like, can you imagine like sports teams training virtually?
Yeah.
Come on,
exactly.
There's nothing
It's
like
a good comparison. Yeah, the hustle and the culture and the sort of camaraderie that comes with having everyone in one place.
You adopt one mind, like you become one thing.
It's even like traveling by yourself versus traveling with friends, right? Like you do, yeah, so true.
Or remote can be good if you have really bad people.
Yeah,
because no one wants to be around anyone else. So like, but that you're already doomed. So
yeah, exactly. And just finally on this topic, there's a lot of talk at the moment around the future of work, with people talking about 4-day work weeks, and we've talked about remote working and so on. What do you think the future of work looks like? And that's a very broad question, but
sure. So I think that good times create weak people, and weak people create bad times. And bad times create good people, or strong people, and strong people create good times. And right now we're in very good times, too good. And so I think the people are getting pretty weak. I see it because I'm looking at the petty sort of things people complain about, right? Buying $15 juices, complaining because they have to work till 3 o'clock and they're only allowed to bring 2 dogs to the office. Like, just things where you're like, people haven't experienced hardship for a long time.
Yeah.
And so I think that's coming. And it's going to shake a lot of people. And I think that, there's a lot of talk about 3-day work weeks and stuff. I mean, it's a nice utopia kind of thought, but if we look at history, it looks like most people are going to get it one hell of a wake-up call.
Yeah.
And we're going to go back to less complaining, more doing.
Yeah, I remember talking to Peter Beck from Rocket Lab about the same thing. He's like, nobody ever changed the world working 40 hours a week.
Exactly. And besides, people, really talented people, they enjoy what they do, right? It's like they don't see it as work.
Yeah.
Again, we've got this false dichotomy. You've got play and enjoyment and work, but that's silly. Really good people combine the two. Yeah. Work is play. Work is fun. They're enjoying themselves, and they want to do it a lot.
Yeah. couldn't agree more. So we're into the rapid fire questions to finish. So the personal computer, the internet, the smartphone have all catalysed major shifts in the way we all live and work. What do you think one of the next major technological kind of waves that's truly going to transform the world is going to be?
Well, probably like some new interface, because all of those things have been interfaces. So like that brain thing where you think and it communicates back in. Brain technology and having a way to communicate with machines and networks that doesn't include a screen, a keyboard and a mouse. That.
Okay. And you've spent about 15 million of your own money advertising, with a large chunk of that going to Facebook. What's the secret of a good Facebook ad?
To know your numbers and to measure everything, and to like only spend money if you make more than you spend, right?
Yeah.
Like that's as simple as it is, but no one does that. And so advertising is an expense for them and they can't spend unlimited amounts. But when you make money from it, you'd be silly. It's like if you put $1 into a machine, $2 comes out. Why would you have a budget?
Not just poor money.
Why would you have a budget?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Budgets are for people that are losing money.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk at the moment around these social media giants, in particular Facebook's been kind of beaten up quite a lot over the past 12 months, it'd be fair to say. What do you think the future of Facebook is? Do you think it'll be here in 10 years?
Death.
Right.
People are like, it's not good for a human to be on that thing. You know, like, because you're looking at other people and you're worrying about like just weird things. It's a waste of time. It's unproductive. You don't learn things. It's an echo chamber. It's not good for you. And so I think it will end. I think it's already ending, right? Like I talk to a lot of people who haven't used it in forever.
Yeah.
And what is emerging is
so true.
Is Reddit, honestly. Like, that's number 4, like, in the most popular websites in the world. It goes Google, YouTube, Facebook, Reddit.
Okay.
And I think in the next 2 years, Reddit will overtake Facebook.
Wow.
It's very close. If you just look at Alexa, like the stats.
Yeah. Okay. And what lesson in business has taken you the longest to learn?
It's probably the hire good people.
Yeah.
Seriously, that took a lot of hammering in to learn that one.
Yeah. How do you learn new things today? You know, you read a lot, but do you have other ways of consuming content and acquiring new skills and knowledge?
Yeah, I would say it's like immersion and obsession. So if I want to learn something, I just think about it, dream about it, read about it, find people who are interested in being obsessed with me, being obsessed together, like just doing anything I can to learn more about this thing and like testing, playing with things, experimenting. Yeah. If you're not obsessed with it, like you can't really get very good.
Yeah. And I when people ask me about you and my time working with you, I always say that you're one of the most well-read people that I've ever met. So when you think about all of the books you've ever read, what would you say are the 2 or 3 that have had the most transformative impact on your life?
Sure. So the ones that come to mind right now is like Ray Dalio Principles. That's a great book.
Yeah.
And then Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz.
Yeah.
It's to do with your brain and like delusions that you have and how to deal with those. And then the third one would be The Everything Store.
Yes. It's
about Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
And that's just such a great story. I'd add one more, which is Made in America, about Sam Walton.
Yes, right. And you've read all the annual reports of, Amazon and most companies, right? Spend a lot of time consuming
not
those.
Most companies, but good ones, like the best.
Good companies,
I just try to identify the best companies in the world and I'll read their statements. And I can tell people that reading the statements is better than reading the books.
Right. What's the biggest thing you've learned from the Amazon reports?
The principles. Yeah. Like that's what I was saying, a company needs to have them.
Yeah.
Bezos stated in 1995, I think, or 1993, he stated the mission, the goal, he stated the principles, and then that is exactly what they did for like 25 years. Yep. They never changed it. It was that, and they held that constant, and everyone internalized that and actually made it a part of themselves. That DNA pattern like just replicated itself through the entire organization, and it still has today, even when Amazon has 600,000 employees. All of them still to this day have that in them.
Wow.
Which is the most important thing.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to an ambitious 18-year-old who wants to use a Steve Jobs phrase, leave a dent in the universe?
What's my advice for them?
Yeah.
To do it.
Yeah.
And to just try and think about what you're interested in. Like, think back to your childhood, because that's a real great, like, ask your parents and people who know you, like, what do I not shut up about? What am I obsessed about? Find out, like, just understand yourself, and then you'll start to understand your passions and interests, and then in that area, find a problem people have, and try to align your passion with a problem other people have and a business, and that's when, like, that's where it happens.
Yeah, okay. And what single entrepreneur in the world do you look up to the most to today and why?
If I had to say one, it would be Jeff Bezos.
Yeah. What about him specifically, other than the fact that he's the wealthiest person in the world?
Yeah, so it's not that at all. It's mostly like that he has built the most successful company of all time, basically, and that he has, like, stuck to his principles for so long. He used a counterintuitive strategy. Everyone ridiculed him for years and thought he was an idiot. And, like, even Wall Street and the press, everyone's been on his back in the early days, and he didn't flinch. So he stood up, he did his analysis, he had a conviction. Everyone in the world thought he was wrong, and he didn't flinch. And then it prevailed that he was right.
Yeah. Right?
So he's got these elements. He's intelligent, he's unorthodox, and he's an athlete. That guy is relentless. He even owns the domain relentless.com.
Really?
If you go, he was going to call Amazon Relentless, but then some PR people were like, yeah, I don't know, Jeff, probably not that friendly.
Yeah.
But you can tell he is that guy. You don't want to be up against that dude.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Even Elon Musk says you don't want to be up against that dude in his book, because he's ruthless. Yeah. And he's stuck to it for like 25 years. He hasn't relented. So, like, he has all the attributes I admire, and he's proven it.
He has, yeah. And I asked you this question maybe 5 years ago, and you're a little bit closer to this age, so I wanted to ask it again today. What do you think the 16-year-old boy you were would think of the man you've become?
That's interesting. I don't even know how to think about that. How would the 16-year-old me think of who I am now?
Yeah.
Probably, like, this is kind of obvious, but I had no idea.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I didn't understand myself, but seeing it now, it's so obvious that that's all along what I should have done.
Right, yeah. If you were looking back at that 16-year-old version of yourself, giving him one piece of advice today, what would you say to him?
Know yourself.
Yeah, okay. And what would you say is the quality of mind or state of mind that's best served you in your success so far, in one word?
Focus.
Yeah, and a question that's a Peter Thiel question. I remember you originally told me to read 0 to 1. What's something you believe to be true that not many people agree with you on?
That the way humans think fundamentally is wrong, and that we can't even use it to comprehend what this life is.
Right.
Like, we think of start and end.
Yeah.
What came before the start?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Our like binary state thinking, like hot, cold, on, off, like start, end, it does not work to analyze what this life is. And so, but no one's gone back and reinvented human logic from day one, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I think in the future we are going to realize that, and it'll totally change everything.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. And when you look back over everything so far, from having had that early epiphany on the private island to starting, your first businesses in your parents' garage to, creating, you say 60 millionaire students with many more on the way, I'm sure, and helping, over 20,000 people with their dreams. What are you most proud of today when you look back over your success so far?
It would probably be just finding a little spot in the world where I can actually help other people in a way that also helps me,
Yeah.
that I also enjoy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I never knew you could have all of these things in one thing. I thought business was like, it couldn't be like that, but it can if you engineer it correctly. Most people don't, but when you get it like that, there's nothing better I can imagine to have.
Yeah. What do you want now? Like, what's next?
Well, to achieve the mission.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the mission is big, and it's like that because all the other goals I set were small and I kept achieving them.
Yeah.
So I just thought, even the ones I set that were big, and I remember when I set them, I was like, dude, you're delusional. They came true.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, screw it. Let's just go really big.
Yeah.
Because nothing makes you happier than just chipping like step by step little bits towards some massive goal. And just little progress to something big.
Right.
And so, what was the question again?
What do you want now?
Yeah, so to achieve that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and to just get closer towards it, make more progress towards it,
Yeah, and you may have just answered my next question, but what have you discovered to be the secret to happiness in your life so far?
To find out truly like who you are and what you're interested in, like knowing yourself, and then adding value to the world instead of like taking from it, in a way that also adds value to you. So being like a symbiotic partner to the world, and knowing yourself, and just doing all of that it aligns all of the major things in the most optimal way.
Yeah, and how far away is the private island?
I don't think I would ever get one of those.
Right. Is that a reflection?
That sounds like a lot of maintenance and a lot of headaches, right?
Yeah.
Like, I've learned that nothing makes me happier than building things. So when I see money now, I think of engineers. Like, I can hire more engineers. I can get more smart people in a room, scientists. Like, I can do more research and development. I can build things, and that to me is more fun than any material object.
Yep, absolutely. Well, it's been a huge pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time, and it's been very cool to see your story and your success develop so much over the past 5 years, from when you were still involved in Snap and Spec through to today, and all of the students you're helping all over the world. So we're grateful for you putting the time aside. And the last question we always ask is whether you can look down this camera here. And the last question we ask is, what is your $1 billion piece of advice, or the top bit of advice that you would leave the viewers with for the world of business, entrepreneurship, and making things happen?
So know who you are, like discover yourself, and then be that person, solve problems in the world, and start your own company, help other people, and don't care what anybody else thinks.
Sam Ovens, thank you. Cheers.
So I hope you liked that video. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments. So I just wanted to get on here and let you know real quick that if you would want to try out Sam's course for free for 7 days, all you need to do is pretty much click on any of the videos that I have, go down below, and I'm always going to have a pinned comment where it has a link to where you can pretty much try out Sam's course for free. So even if you're not planning on buying it, you can still go in there, click that link, sign up, and you'll have access to the course for free for 7 days. And then, just like a Netflix free trial, you can just cancel it with like 1 or 2 clicks. You don't have to talk to any team member, send any emails, nothing. So if you want to go and do that, click that link. If not, just let me know what you thought about the video down below.